Hey friends, this is Marilyn from Tarot Clarity, and today I'm doing a side-by-side of the Tarocchi del Mitelli 1650, 1660-ish with the Tarocchi Barattini 1803. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that you're going to see differences. An example, this card is presented as the Fool card, whereas I think with the Mitelli, this card, I think, was presented as the Fool card. Now, I could be mistaken, but that's the way it appears in the run. Now, the way the cards could be on the sheet could vary. You know, it's just the way it was printed. It doesn't, so who knows? I tend to see this card that's coming forth as the Fool card as the Magician card. So I guess it's up for grabs, or there is a truth, but I don't know what it is. But at any rate, this is the first card out of the gate between the two cards. Let me flip the camera so that we can look down at them. Another thing you'll see immediately is that the Barattini is in reverse. So as it was explained to me by Marco, and you can see evidence of it when you really look at the cards up close. By 1803, when the Barattini was created, the copper plates of the Mitelli were long gone, or they were just not accessible to Barattini. But he must have appreciated and really thought this deck was worth copying. So to an extent, deck that existed, right? The drawings or the cards themselves were used, maybe they were traced over or they were just drawn, copied to be used as the plates. And then, of course, when the plates were printed, they would have been in reverse. Now, obviously, we don't have the delicacy or the vitality of the Mitelli in the Barattini because it's a copy. It was not created by the hand of the master. But that's not to say that it's not a delicious deck. I love the colors in particular. And bear in mind that for some reason, if the Mitelli had not been preserved for us to see, and we only had a copy of the Barattini, then I think we'd be very happy to have the Barattini because it's still a beautiful deck. And this goes to show us in with other decks how sometimes and how easy it would have been to understand how certain cards that came before have a certain orientation. And then by the time another deck comes along, it's in reverse because the same process might have happened. But here we have, in this deck at least, in the Barattini deck at least, this is presented as the first card. I like this card as the Fool card, because it just seems more like a fool to me, just somebody who's disheveled. He's just, going through town. He's got his little toys, maybe inappropriate for a person his age. But there we have it as the Magician. Now, I remember it as 1725, but I've read sources where it's 1750. But sometime between around 1725, 1750, particularly I think in Bologna, cards 2 through 5 were replaced with the 4 Moors. Now, Mitelli himself had changed the cards 2 through 5, as we see. As we recall, we have the standing Pope, we have the standing Emperor, we have the seated Emperor, and we have the seated Pope. The seated gentleman had more prestige or value than the standing ones, who completely replaced the female cards. And you'll notice, well, in the Mitelli in general, there's no numbers on them, but cards through 2 through 5 were already designated the same value so that nobody would get their, there would be no political fuss made about whose card was valued at more. Now, obviously, when it came time to playing the game, and they were done in tricks, I guess, I think of it like the game of war, right? Whoever laid the whatever, like if these cards had the same value and multiples of these cards were played in a trick, then the last card laid would have been the one that won the trick. So that's how they got themselves out of trouble. Now, with this deck, and I had to refer to the sheet that came with it that Marco wrapped it with, 2 through 5 are replaced by the 4 Moors. Now, another thing to bear in mind, which I neglected to mention when I started this video, is that my copy of the Mitelli is a Rivoltini, and this copy of the Barattini is not, which means that the Mitelli had folded edges, right? We see that the back paper is folded over to the front, authentic to the way it was created back in the day. So here we have the 4 Moors in their respective spots, replacing the standing and sitting emperors and popes. So I try really hard to remember, keep in mind the order of them, but I guess it really is immaterial because they have the same equal value and we're not really playing card games. 3 of these Moors look like women. There's only one, this one, that looks like he's a gentleman. He doesn't have the finer features of a woman's face. Plus, he doesn't seem to be wearing a dress or anything. Whereas these women seem to be, very pretty and delicate, and they seem to have feminine clothing. And this one's carrying a rose, and she's wearing pearls. You see what I'm saying? So it's true, whichever one we use, if we use the Mitelli or we use the Barattini, we don't have the benefit of the women, right? We just have in the Mitelli we don't, because we have men of different import or different, power. I guess I take that back. I guess with the Barattini, we do have feminine energy. So when these cards pop up, we can see them as feminine energy. Maybe the pearls we can see as the Empress and the female Pope, or as, I don't know. They're not in that order though, right? This one's the second one, and this one doesn't wear pearls like I would think like the female, Pope would, like being a mystic or something like that. So we do have to figure out a way to see these cards, or we could just see them as women and men having value, have special, import. It could be political or whatever. We'll have to come up with a way to see them. Now, I've put these in the same order as the Barattini is numbered, which is different than the order that we're accustomed to seeing. We have the 5 of Cupid, whereas normally we would think of Cupid as or love as 6. We just have Cupid, which is a symbol for love. And here, we see, again, the reversal. Hold on. I apologize that I have to put tape on some of the cards. It's very distressing, and I hope YouTube comes up with a statement regarding having to deface medieval and Renaissance art, or art that would be the kind of art you would see in an art museum, tasteful art. I would just hope they would take a position. But for now, the religious zealots are having a field day attacking tarot readers. So we have to cover their beauty. But we see the difference. We see the difference in the drawing, right? Now, bear in mind, like I said, if the Mitelli had been lost to time and all we had was the Barattini, and maybe we never would have known that it was a copy, we would have been happy to have the Barattini because we would have said, my God, this is a gorgeous deck. But there ain't nothing like the real thing. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not dissing the Barattini because I will use it and I will be happy to use it. But you see what happens in the course of history when a deck, is to be preserved and they lose the copper plates and then they just use a card and then they trace it and then they use it. They kind of, something gets lost in translation and they get reversed. So we're accustomed to seeing Temperance is 14, but in the Barattini it's 7, and I just put them in the same order for convenience. And of course this is a Rivoltini and this one is not. But the card texture is the same. The same quality cards. And I don't know how to properly call them, but they are the same. They feel the same. And they look the same. We don't have the billowing cloak in the back as we have in the Mitelli. That's interesting. We just have this tiny little thing. This one, right where it appeared right over the shoulder, but they chose not to do it because it took up, look, see, that the head goes up to the line here, and here we have more distance. So that's interesting. Also, bear in mind, if you're thinking of getting the Barattini also, the Rivoltini is about 5 cards thicker, so now we're just about at the same point. Let's see how many cards these are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, 10. Maybe it's 10 cards thicker. Nah, I think it's maybe more like 8 cards thicker, something like that. 7 or 8, not 10. So we have more of an attempt to make it look like marble in the Barattini, whereas in the Mitelli, it's just the shadow, the cross-hatching of line. So that's interesting. And we have a different angle. We have so there are some differences aside from just being transverse, right? Just aside from being a flip, there were some artistic changes or decisions made. I might not have caught it in the earlier cards, but I'm starting to catch on now. Interesting. And of course, you see the difference in the beauty in the face. And here, it looks like she's a redhead. Where here, it's the red turban. And we'll have a difference when we lay the cards. Lady Luck is showing her favor to this side. Lady Luck in this card is showing her favor to that side. We have the Hermit. Wisdom and age as a virtue. And, being reminded of the end of time, or how fragile life is, right? When we reach the hermit stage of life, we're toward the end. Now, it's followed by the card that's traditionally known as the Hanged Man, and Mitelli would have understood that this card was replacing the Hanged Man, so it might have been, and the Hanged Man was a card that would have represented disgrace, humiliation, punishment for consequences, that kind of thing. And so this probably is more like I don't know. I haven't read it in any book, but I'm going with the thought that maybe Mitelli got this idea as like the executioner, right? Although this person appears to be sleeping, so he doesn't seem to be knowing it's coming, or maybe he's just bracing himself. So it does look like it could be a bit of a redrum. Excuse me. 13th card. We have the pyramid in the background of both, but slightly different the way they were portrayed. We have something here that's not present here. Or if it is, it's presented a little differently. They both have their scythe and an hourglass, which is articulated in full here. Here it's kind of, cut off at the top. So here his tail curves up from behind. That's interesting. So he has a tail. We don't see the tail here curling up or anything like that. Or maybe it's the serpent's tail. I'm not sure. That's some kind of tail. I don't think it's anything else because it's not quite in the right spot for that. And we have a different number. It's 14 versus 15. And we have the thunderbolt or the lightning bolt or the lightning strike. May God strike me dead if I'm lying. So this could be seen as the first card of the celestial sequence. That's how I see it. And for those of you who are members and you saw the first batch of my personal tarot cards that I'm working on, I have them designed in such a way that the first celestial card is this. Now, it would make sense that, some of these cards might have a different order, like, well, I'll get into that another time, I guess. Got them out of whack over here, but that's okay. So we have the star card. And here, the Barattini puts more emphasis on the star, which I think sort of is when the Hermit card, became this in the French decks. And those decks came out around the same time as the Mitelli. So I think there's something to be said, and I've never read it in any book, and I've never heard it anywhere, but it's just my own observation, and I've put it out there, and I think some other people might be agreeing with me, that this card somehow became the image of the French hermit. Excuse me, I just took a sip of tea. With his lantern, see, he's got a lantern because the star aspect was downplayed with the Mitelli. And here now with the Barattini, it's more, it's more in the forefront, although the gentleman is still the primary focus. But we have a lone old guy, white beard, with, a burden, and he's got a lantern, not an hourglass. And I think they mistook it and they made it the hermit. But here it is and I think, because the hermit, Mitelli knew, was what it was representing. It was representing an old guy. Where did the hermit go? He knew that the hermit was an old guy. Oh, Lord have mercy. I hate when I make mistakes. There we go. Right, he knew he was Italian. He knew it was the passage of time. It was represented in various ways. Sometimes he had a hunchback. Sometimes he had wings. He was always old. He had crutches sometimes. Sometimes there was a stag with a rack on its head. Sometimes he had an hourglass. Okay, we have the moon, represented by the goddess Diana with her dog for hunt. We have a different moon too. Look, interesting. So some liberties were taken. And the arrow, the spear tip is missing. And her finger pointing, different. $19 for Apollo, the sun god. And you see the halos are different, treated differently. And then we have the world card before judgment, because the world is part of the celestial cards. I agree with them on that. Now, when I was showcasing the Barattini, I said I would find out what this stuff meant. And I put out a question to Marco, but he didn't know. But when I put it to my husband, and he said, well, I don't know about the M and the S on the top and the bottom, but the LRIP could just indicate that Marco was doing a low-rate initial production, which I think is a military term. The LRIP, low-rate initial production. We can be completely wrong on that. I don't know rightly what that stands for. And if I hear from Marco regarding what that all means, excuse me, I'll put it down below in the descriptive area. And then we have Judgment. Now, interestingly, the hands are coming from the same direction. That's interesting. Although the scroll is hanging on this side on this one. So there are some subtle differences. Maybe they just drew this one by hand. Maybe they did the pips, and they'll remember the 2 through 5 Marco would have recreated for both decks. So he didn't choose to copy what he had for the Mitelli for the Barattini, which is interesting. So Marco took the opportunity to do them a little differently. Here they point down, here they point up. And here they're the same, more or less. Well, we don't have the gold on the sheath, but remember, these were recreations that Marco did for both decks. And the 5 would be based on the Mitelli again. Different colors. Desiderium L. Parabit. Oh, and I faux pas did not show the backs. Here are the backs. My apologies for taking 22 minutes to show you those. I like for the 8 that we have 2 squares, right? But one's at an angle and one's more like a square. One's more like a diamond and one's more like a square. So the Barattini removed the shield or whatever that was. Here we don't see the eyes of the knight, and here we do. It gives a different, if you pick up on that in a reading, it could give a different meaning or a different take on the guy. Somebody doing something on the down low or doesn't want to be caught. Not showing who he is. But this one doesn't seem as, like, this guy looks like he's about to strike. This guy doesn't. He's just trotting along. He doesn't have the same posture, right? He doesn't have the same posture as wanting to strike. In fact, his second hand seems to be cupping his top hand. So it's a very interesting take. It's an interesting difference. Subtle. The Barattini is more youthful, the king. Their aces are different. Lee Trope, VC Mondenin, Precipsi. Now remember, 2 through 5 were cards that Marco recreated, and he chose not to make them the same. So he changed them in the Barattini. So Barattini's definitely simplified the cups. I think I have 2 here. Yep. So their faces are quite different. This one's got quite a big nariz. Again, the hand holding the cudgel is coming from the same direction. So maybe they just drew this free, they did the drawing themselves rather than copying it and tracing it or whatever they did. Yeah, so remember 2 through 5 would have been different. Would have not existed, rather, so. And Marco just changed, decided to make the 2 through 5s of the Barattini different than he did the Mitelli. Maybe he felt that, to do it differently would match better what the feeling of the Barattini. I can't speak for Marco, though. So we no longer have the aged individual gentleman sitting there warming his hands by the fire. Interesting. They removed that in the Barattini. Could have been, references to Aesop's fables, right? Where we have the stork and the snake. I'm sure there's a story about a stork and a snake, but here maybe they just couldn't fit it in, so they left it out. And it just goes to show, like, we have proof that stuff was eliminated, even though a deck was copied from another deck, right? If the way it was drawn didn't allow for them to add or include something, you can see why things get left out or just not drawn the same way, or not at all, right? So we have like a stork and the grapes, definitely reference. And I've done videos on Aesop's fables and Italian decks. Very deep. I have almost 1,000 videos. Keep you busy for a really long time if you wanted to watch them from the beginning. But I've covered lots of territory, which is why it makes it really hard for me to come up with video ideas, because I've done so many already. Oh, the Barattini honors the Mitelli, right? But then he puts his own name down here. And perhaps this is the portrait of Mitelli as we see here. That was a nice nod to the creator of the original deck. And remember, Marco would have created these 2 through 5. And on the 4th card is where Marco put his stamp as the publisher of both decks. And he had them the same, the images. Oh, but he made the 5th coin card a little different for them. And now we're back to the original Barattini. And this is that, and that is that. So remember, it's a reversal, right? When I do comparisons of decks, I usually stop at the, well, no, not that I always do. For those of you who like to hang in there for the pips, because pips are really important, I like to do the whole deck, but sometimes I'll just show the pips like together in like a spread of, in my hand. But I think this is an important deck to show side by side. Look at this one being in the acrobat. We do have it on the opposite side. So the feathers or the plumes are handled quite differently. He's got ribbons around his stockings. And the treatment of the horse, this is like a speckled horse. Maybe it was Barattini's favorite horse. Maybe he had a horse. And like Lady Fortuna, the Queen of Coins, is showing favor to whatever's on this side and whatever's on this side of their respective decks. And I do want to show the boxes because there is a difference in boxes. Ah, look, so we have some handwriting or we have an inscription here, 1803. Maybe this is the publisher. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. But he took the opportunity, Barattini took the opportunity to take the side of the table to just present us with this additional information regarding the deck. And with the Mitelli Rivoltini, we have it in the book format, and with the thread, right, the ribbon. And there was 50 cards. It was a run of 50. I got number 1 in this deck, which I just can't believe my wonderful fortune and blessing that Marco gave me the first run. This one is a different box. Pull it like this. And for this one, also 50 cards, I got number 3, which I'm still thrilled about. So there we have it, the Mitelli and the Barattini, both beautifully published by Marco Benedetti. I hope you enjoyed these decks. I sure as heck have. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be brave, and be kind.